So on my channel, I've done many videos on many topics. And sometimes I feel like either I have new perspective or new insight on certain topics, or in some cases, the old videos just were bad quality or just didn't get that many views. But I still feel like the topic is an important one, so I want to bring it back up. And that's what today's vlog is going to be about, is I want to talk about a topic that I had talked about in a previous video 4 years ago, and that is the age of a path, or spirituality, religion. People try to equate this thing of because it's older, it's better or more valid, or there's more reason, there's more authenticity to it because this is an old and ancient path. The reason I had done that video is the focus of this. The age of a path does not give it more concrete validity or validation. Just because somebody's done it that way for so long doesn't mean, oh, well, they're right because they discovered this a long time ago. The reason for this is the basic idea of we grow and learn as a society and people. We have more information available to us. Now, this, of course, is under the impression that you believe our modern advancements in science and communication to share ideas is better than just people sitting out in the woods and observing and coming up with their own ideas just from sitting there and experiencing it. I think there's value in both approaches. Just like back then, now we have people who discover something and share it. It's just today it's a little bit easier to share information with the internet, access to books from all around the world, colleges and universities. So there's different ways of distributing the information today versus back then. But we have old practices that people believe something, like, as an example, the earth is flat because they observed it as being flat. Now that we have technology to even leave the earth, we have the ability to see that the earth isn't exactly flat. It's not perfectly round either, but it's, it's like it's a clump. It's like a rock, it's it's rock covered with an atmosphere and water and people and all sorts of different life forms on its surface. So we have a better understanding of what the earth is today versus what it was. And I think the same thing can be said for religion. What is the ultimate goal of spirituality and religion? Now, that of course is a topic that can be debated and argued depending on your perspective. Like, what are you seeking versus why did they put it together? Some people might argue it's a system of control. That's a very negative way of looking at it. But I mean, if you really think about it, it is type of a system of control. It's trying to help people to be better individuals. You might argue that because depending on the religion, some people take their practice in a very harmful way to others who are outside of their religion. But on a whole, it usually sets a guideline for individuals to exist within a community of people. I mean, even if you look at things like Christianity, the whole idea here, as I understand it, was you had these different clans and tribes that had their own localized spiritual practices. I don't have references for this. This is based upon hearsay. I like to say that as a disclaimer because I typically like to share sources. You should question things. Is this accurate? Is this not accurate? Based upon my observations of reading things historically, it looked like different tribal communities. And we're talking about all over the place, all over Europe, even here in America. There was all sorts of tribes and clans, and they were localized with their spiritualities and spiritual beliefs. So if they were all doing their own thing and believing their own thing, then you had warring clans and tribes that would fight against each other for resources, for land, for whatever they were trying to claim and take. It was all about that survival. So how do you unify the people and stop getting them to fight? We have to have something to bring them together, and religion and spirituality is one way of doing it. And how do you ensure that they're not going to harm and hurt each other? Well, you can't just have laws. You have to have some ways of enforcing them, and tapping into somebody's belief and the idea of like, oh, well, if you do bad things, you are punished eternally. That's a good way to scare people in the line. Now, I'm not saying and trying to dismiss those religions that have this whole spiritual dogma of be good or bad things will happen to you, so much as I'm trying to say that it is one way of observing one of the benefits of having some sort of religiously driven society. And I think that we see that in places that either have no spirituality at all or are a little bit more open with their morals of what you're allowed and can't do. You have a tendency to see those be a little bit more chaotic or anarchy related. I think humans, we're raised in our society and in our culture, and depending on that culture and society, which has a tendency to be very religious influenced, we have this impact from that spiritual belief. Even if not everybody shares the same belief, there's still an overlining belief system with inside of cultures around the world. So when we're driving towards this, okay, well, what morals and what things do we go with? that comes with religion. Society grows and develops and comes away to those who survive had something that helped drive them together and unite them. So the whole reason I'm bringing all of that up is what has survived today is an adaptation of the past, but it is a modern adaptation. Things grow and change with time. So even if there is a connection with the past, as we learn new understandings, like again, observations of the earth being flat, which apparently at one time was a fact because you saw it, that was all you had to go off with, you can look at different methods of healing. People used to think bleeding someone out, getting their blood out of them to get out the bad blood to allow them to heal properly, was a method of healing. We now know more with modern medicine that that's not necessarily the best way to go about it. But we can also look at modern medicine and see that it traces back to some of the folk remedies and folk healers. We look at natural healing remedies that started out as herbalism and then turned into manufactured modern medicine. It has origins in the past, but it's a new way of looking at it. So when people try to say stuff like, oh, well, they're trying to return to paganism, which I would argue is neo-paganism, they're saying, well, that predates Christianity, therefore it's older, therefore it's more right, and it's more connected with the earth. I would disagree, because the old practices of paganism not only are not very well documented, but they're basically have gone, they've disappeared. There's pieces that survive that are adapted by modern monotheistic faiths and practices, and inside the culture, a lot of those practices survived. But it's not the age that gives them validity or validation. It's the meaning for the individual practitioner. Even inside of Christianity, I'm using Christianity as an example because in the USA, Christianity was one of the major religions. When this land was taken from the original inhabitants here and it was built into a country, they had those spiritualities that were Christian focused. I mean, obviously there's some different ones, and there's a whole bunch of stuff with the Church of England and separating from their monarchy over there and forming the states here in the past in the history of the United States. But from the founding, the individuals they were Christian. The original settlers / conquerors were Christian. So the society was built around that ideology, those morals that were inside of there. But as we have grown as a society, as you see all these different denominations come into the country, and as the country began to conquer westward and take more land, we see different viewpoints. So anytime something gets too big, it still gets separated out because people are very focused on their own way of viewing it and their own way of understanding and interpreting it. So I would say that the Christian religions today in the United States are not the same as the original Christian religion when it was originally invented and created. Likewise, with the paganism stuff, people want to tap into before Christians. Okay, but we don't have a lot of that written down, and you're talking about tapping into societies and cultures that were very chaotic, fight to survive. So is that the type of society we would want to live in? Of course not. So what pieces and aspects can we learn from our own personal observations? Take the lessons and apply them. What was it that was so special about these people that originally wrote down or created these spiritualities? What was their inspiration for their viewpoint? This is one of the things that I admire about some of the modern spiritualists, whether it's in Christianity or Judaism, whatever. They have a book of lessons and teachings, and they study that book and reread it over and over and over again, and they try to get new knowledge and wisdom from it. Obviously, everyone's a little bit different in how they approach their studies, but the idea of going back and reading words of wisdom written down by others, learning from others, but then taking it to a place that makes sense to you. In my opinion, every spirituality that everybody has is a brand new spirituality, and it is only as old as since you've been practicing it. So if you were raised in it, fine, then it's based upon your age. But if you just discovered it 5 years ago, 2 years ago, 10, 20 years ago, your spirituality is only 10 or 20 years old. And you might, but the lesson, yes, but your interpretation, your understanding, and your practice of it is only as old as you've been doing it. You are believing and trusting in other individuals the way that they've shared that information. People can read the same book and come to two different conclusions. People can look at the same thing and come to two different conclusions. Take anyone out into a forest and tell them to draw a tree. Not only are the trees going to look different based upon not only the art style and how that individual is capable of drawing, but also the tree that they choose to try to mimic and draw off of. Or go out, see a tree, get as much detail as you can, and then just verbally describe it to someone. Even if you're all looking at the same tree, there might be some variances in how it's described because it's based upon perspective, perception, and your ability to remember and recall. And we can say the same thing for religion and spirituality. Even if it was written down in a book or a text, or we have evidence of it, it's still that person who wrote its interpretation. Then you translate it to different languages, and now you get different perspective based upon the translation. Translating from a different culture, from a different language, there's going to be, oh, what's the closest thing in my language that's similar to that? And if it's not exact, it's not exact, because it's not. In most cases, it is not an exact one-for-one translation because of the cultural influences through time alone. Even in the same culture, time alone is going to have an impact. And we can see representations of this by looking at any religion or spirituality, compare it from country to country, from town to town, from city to city, from group to group, whether that be church, Hof, Coven, Grove, doesn't matter. There's that variance. And the variance in and of itself is a good thing, but this is where we cross over into what's called UPG, or unverified personal gnosis. Gnosis is firsthand experience or interaction with divinity, right? Your personal experiences with it. That's important. That's what makes it real to you, your own personal experience. But I feel like we should be applying logic and reassessment when we hear stuff. Don't take anything at face value. If something is written down historically in history books or in religious or spiritual texts, read it and consider it. Think about it. If it's a different language, see if you can go back to that original language, learn about that culture and language, and see if that's really meshing well with you. Maybe the people who translate it, even if they're great translators, maybe they didn't really convey the original message that was intended by the original words it's being translated from. And that, again, applies to any text or book or volume that's out there. Just keep thinking and keep asking questions. That's just my personal opinion and ramblings, and the whole reason I'm bringing this up is just trying to use validity in conversations when people are arguing, oh, well, I'm a neo-pagan because my path predates Christianity, and it was what people originally did, therefore it's right. No, that doesn't hold up. Your religion and your spirituality makes the most sense to you. That's why you're doing it, until you change your mind. And that's fine. That's all right. People, especially I see this mostly in individuals who try to use the term witchcraft. Witchcraft is a modern thing, and the ideas of what modern witchcraft are all based around stuff from like mid to late 1900s. Like, it doesn't predate that. Yes, there's some practices that predate that, and a lot of those practices are existing other practices like in Kabbalah or Hermetics, stuff that you'll see in the Order of the Golden Dawn and things. There'll be practices that are borrowed from other traditions. It's not its own unique thing that traces back. The way that it's practiced now is an accumulation that came together in the 1900s. And people don't want to accept that, and they get really mad when you point that out, especially when they're brand new. But if you look into it, you can see supporting evidence for that. In fact, I've got a video here on YouTube where I talk about the history of modern witchcraft. Go check it out. If you disagree, we can have a discussion about it. I'm always up for discussions and looking at new sources because I want to consider different perspectives. I want to consider different things. But if there's not proof to its ancient history and roots, don't claim it, because that's just misinformation at that point. And if it does have history and roots and origins and stuff, how much has it changed from those original things? Because I guarantee it's changed. Even within one generation, things are going to change. Things that your parents teach you, family traditions, are going to change from generation to generation. People apply it in their own way. And I think it's important to keep that in mind. So it's always about going back to what the core lesson or value is, and then the adaptation, and trying to pull out and pluck out that adaptation. So there you go. That's my long-winded roundabout bringing up the conversation again about age for path means nothing. It's about what you're getting out of it. Thanks for watching, and I will catch you next one.